He was a titan, a man who owned the skyline with a wife he treated as just another beautiful silent acquisition. When she finally filed for divorce, he laughed. He looked at her lawyer, a man in a rumpled suit with a $500 briefcase, and mocked him. "Is that the best you can do?" He sneered, flashing his $1 million watch. He told his wife she'd be lucky to get the scraps from his table. But he made one fatal mistake. He saw the old, cheap lawyer, but he never saw the woman standing behind him. He never saw the ghost. He thought he was in a legal skirmish. He was actually in a war. And he'd just mocked the country's most dangerous attorney. Andrew Vance didn't just enter a room. He conquered it. Tonight at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts Gala was no different. He was a monolith of new money charisma poured into a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that probably cost more than the average car. His voice, a low baritone, accustomed to being obeyed, boomed across the marble atrium, charming senators and silencing competitors. At his side, impeccably dressed and perfectly silent, was his wife, Elise Vance. To the glittering Boston elite, Elise was a mystery. She was beautiful in a quiet, classical way, like a sergeant painting all graceful lines and watchful eyes. She wore a simple, elegant navy gown by a designer. No one recognized her only jewelry, the blinding 10-carat diamond on her finger. A diamond Andrew frequently referred to as his best investment. "Elise, darling, go fetch Dr. Alistair a glass of champagne, would you?" Andrew said, not looking at her. He was already deep in conversation about a new real estate development in the seaport. Elise just nodded her smile, a faint, polite mask, and slipped away. As she did, she saw Andrew's hand rest for just a moment too long on the lower back of Isabella Rossi, a 25-year-old Instagram model and brand ambassador for a dozen products Elise had never heard of. Isabella giggled, her red sequined dress clinging to her like a second skin. This was their life. A gilded quay on the 50th floor of a Back Bay penthouse where the windows overlooked the Charles River, but the air inside was suffocating. Andrew hadn't always been this way. Or perhaps he had, and she had simply been too in love to see it. He was a builder, a self-made man who had clawed his way up from nothing. But in building his empire, Vance Real Estate Development, he had bulldozed his own humanity. Elise, a former art historian with a brilliant curatorial eye, had become his primary acquisition. He loved owning her. He loved the way old money families looked at her grace and refinement, and by extension had to respect him. But he did not love her. He did not listen to her, consult her, or see her. She was a prop. She returned with the champagne, her hand steady, and handed it to the doctor. Andrew, without even a glance of acknowledgement, continued his story. "The problem with this city," he declared, "is a lack of vision. People are scared of change. I'm not scared. I'm the one making it." Later that night, the mask finally cracked. They were in their penthouse, the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Elise was removing her earrings when Andrew threw his jacket onto a priceless Louis XV chair. "You were quiet tonight," he said, pouring himself a 2-finger measure of Macallan 25. "I didn't have much to say. You and Isabella Rossi seemed to be handling the conversation." Her voice was soft, but for the first time it held a sliver of ice. Andrew chuckled. "Oh, that. Isabella's just fun, Elise. You should try it sometime. You're always so serious. Lighten up. It's just a party." "My sister called again, Andrew," Elise said, changing the subject, her back still to him. "She's not doing well. The doctors in Chicago want to try the new treatment. I need to go." Andrew sighed, the sound loud and theatrical. We've discussed this. It's a waste of money, all of it. That experimental nonsense. It's just snake oil for the desperate. And I need you here for the groundbreaking on the new tower next week. The press will be there. You know the drill. She's my sister. And I'm your husband. And my business, our business, requires your presence. That treatment is frivolous, and so is the trip. Send her flowers. Send her a check. But you're not going. He drained his scotch and walked toward the bedroom. And for God's sake, burn that dress. You looked like a governess. Ask Isabella who she uses, I'll pay for it. Elise stood frozen. The city lights blurred through the tears that finally welled in her eyes. It wasn't just the insult, or the callousness about her sister, or the blatant infidelity. It was the word, frivolous. He had dismissed her family, her love, her entire inner life as a triviality. She turned and looked at her reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back was a stranger, a pale ghost in a borrowed life. But as she watched, the ghost's expression hardened. The sadness receded, replaced by a cold, clear resolution. The mask wasn't just cracked, it was broken. And she was finally, terrifyingly free. The next morning, while Andrew was at his gym, Elise Vance made a single phone call. Not to a famous Boston divorce lawyer. Not to a high-powered firm. She called a number on a small, worn business card she had kept hidden in a hollowed-out art history book for 3 years. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice low. "This is Elise. I'm ready." Andrew Vance was in a board meeting tearing apart a junior architect's rendering for a new lobby, when his assistant, a nervous young man named Ben, interrupted him. "Mr. Vance, I'm sorry, sir, but there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent." "Did he have an appointment?" Andrew snapped, not looking up from the blueprints. "No, sir, but—" "Then get rid of him. Sir, he's a process server." The room went silent. Andrew's head snapped up. A small, unpleasant smile touched his lips. "Well, well. Let him in." The man was nondescript in a rumpled suit. He handed Andrew a thick manila envelope and left. Andrew didn't open it. He knew what it was. He tossed it onto the massive mahogany table. "Gentlemen," he said to his team, "forgive the interruption. It seems Mrs. Vance has decided to renegotiate her position in the company." His team gave forced, sycophantic chuckles. Andrew was amused. He was almost impressed. It took guts, he thought. Misguided, foolish guts. That evening he didn't go home. He went to his lawyer's office, Marcus Slade, a senior partner at Garrity. Slade and Cromwell was the most ruthless corporate litigator in Boston. His office, overlooking the harbor, was a temple of dark wood leather and smoked glass. Slade was Andrew, in a legal sense, predatory, precise, and breathtakingly expensive. "She finally did it," Andrew said, tossing the envelope onto Slade's desk. Slade, a man with silver hair and the cold eyes of a shark, didn't open it. "Are we surprised? I'm surprised it took her this long. So what's the play? She'll want the penthouse. She'll want alimony. She'll cry about her emotional distress." Andrew laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Just crush her, Marcus. Make her understand her mistake. I want her gone, and I want it done cheap. Give her the standard minimal payout, the state minimum. She signed a prenup after all." "The prenup is ironclad," Slade said, finally opening the envelope and scanning the first page. "I drafted it myself. She's entitled to $1 million for every year of marriage. 10 years. 10 million, plus the Willow Creek apartment. A generous offer. She'll have no grounds to contest it. 10 million, Andrew scoffed. That's a rounding error. Fine. But not a penny more. I want her to feel this. I want her to realize what she's walking away from. And add an NDA, a permanent binding non-disclosure agreement. I don't want her running to the Globe crying about my infidelities. Slade nodded, already mentally drafting the response. And her counsel, he asked, flipping the page. Who is she using Kate's Hewitt and Breen? That's who she threatened with last time. He found the name. His brow furrowed. J. Peterson, Esquirrel, office on School Street. He tapped his keyboard, running the name through the Bar Association database. James Peterson, huh? Never heard of him. He pulled up the man's credentials. Well, this is interesting. He's a general practitioner. Wills a few DUIs, some minor real estate closings. A one-man shop. It seems Andrew, Slade said with a thin smile. Mrs. Vance went bargain shopping. Andrew threw back his head and laughed. A public defender. She's bringing a traffic lawyer to a gunfight. Oh, this is rich. This is pathetic. It's an emotional move, Slade said, closing the file. She's trying to find someone on her side instead of someone competent. It's a fatal error. We'll bleed him dry on procedural motions alone. He's probably never even seen a 100-page discovery request. Good. Send the offer. 10 million the apartment she hates, and the NDA. Non-negotiable. Tell this Peterson to advise his client to take it before I get angry and find a way to make it 5. Slade's team sent the offer the next morning. It was intentionally insulting, buried in 200 pages of legal threats and posturing. Andrew, meanwhile, didn't change his life one bit. He moved Isabella Rossi into a 5-star hotel suite. He was photographed with her at a high-profile restaurant, his arm slung possessively around her. The message was clear. He was Andrew Vance. He was untouchable. Elise was already a ghost. A week passed. Slade's office received a reply. It wasn't a counteroffer. It wasn't an angry letter. It was a single-typed page from the office of J. Peterson Esquirrel. It read simply, Dear Mr. Slade, we are in receipt of your client's proposal dated October 10th. The offer is respectfully rejected in its entirety. We will see you at the preliminary mediation. Sincerely, James Peterson, counsel for Mrs. Vance. Rejected, Andrew bellowed over the phone. Who the hell does this guy think he is? He's supposed to beg us to keep the offer on the table. Calm down, Andrew. Slade's voice was smooth. This is a good sign. It means he's an idiot. He thinks he can play hardball. He thinks he's going to walk into mediation, and the judge will just split the difference. He doesn't understand the pre-enup. He's out of his depth, and he's about to find out exactly how deep the water is. Fine, Andrew spat. Mediation it is. I want to be there. I want to see the look on this clown's face when I'm done with him. The mediation was set in a neutral, sterile conference room at a high-end arbitration center. The room was designed to be imposing with a 30-foot polished granite table and panoramic, soundproof windows. Andrew arrived first, a deliberate power move. He was flanked by Marcus Slade and 2 sharp, identical-looking junior associates from Garrity Slade and Cromwell. They were a phalanx of power dressed in matching dark navy suits, carrying identical leather briefcases. Andrew, in a charcoal bespoke suit with a bold crimson tie, looked like a king holding court. He sat at the head of the table, poured himself a glass of water, and checked his Patek Philippe watch. 10 minutes late. He sniffed to Slade. Unprofessional. Already a bad start for them. "They're trying to rattle us, Andrew. It's amateur," Slade murmured, arranging his files. The door opened. Elise walked in. She looked ordinary. She wore a simple cream-colored cashmere sweater and grey flannel trousers. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like she was going to an art gallery, not a divorce battle. She took a seat halfway down the table opposite Andrew. A moment later, her lawyer followed. Andrew had to physically stifle a laugh. James Peterson was everything Andrew despised. He was at least 65 with a shock of untidy grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His suit was a rumpled, mustard-brown tweed that looked like it had been fashionable in 1983. It was clean, but worn at the elbows. He carried a soft-sided, worn-out leather briefcase that bulged in odd places. He looked, as Andrew had predicted, like a high school geography teacher who had lost his way. "Mr. Peterson," Slade said, his voice dripping with false cordiality as he stood to shake the man's hand. "Mr. Slade," Peterson replied, his voice surprisingly firm. He had a faint, unplaceable accent. He sat next to Elise, pulled out a simple yellow legal pad and a single well-used fountain pen, and nodded at the mediator. "We're ready." The mediator, a retired judge, began the standard preamble. Andrew tuned it out, staring openly at Peterson. He leaned over to Slade. "Seriously, Marcus?" "Look at him," Andrew whispered, just loud enough for the other side to hear. "I've got more in my watch than he made all last year. Elise is really scraping the bottom of the barrel." Elise's expression didn't flicker. Peterson seemed not to hear his attention fully on the mediator. "Mr. Slade," the mediator said, "would you like to present your client's position?" "Gladly," Slade said. He stood all polish and menace. "Our position is simple and immovable. The prenuptial agreement, which Mrs. Vance reviewed with her own counsel at the time, is ironclad. It stipulates a one-time payment of $10 million, out of sheer generosity. Mr. Vance is also willing to sign over the deed to the Willow Creek apartment." He paused, letting the generosity hang in the air. "In return, we require a full and total NDA. This offer is more than fair. It is frankly extravagant. We are here today to sign this agreement and move on. There is nothing else to discuss." The mediator nodded. "Mr. Peterson." "Your response." Peterson took a moment. He uncapped his pen. "We appreciate Mr. Slade's summary," he said, his voice mild. "However, my client will not be signing that agreement. The pre-enip, as you call it, is not the issue today." Slade stiffened. "I beg your pardon? It's the only issue." "No," Peterson said, looking up, his eyes clear and intelligent behind the smudged glasses. "The issue, sir, is one of fraudulent concealment. The prenup covers all declared marital assets. Our contention is that Mr. Vance has failed to declare the vast majority of his assets." Andrew barked a laugh. "That's a bold-faced lie. A desperate one." "Is it?" Peterson asked mildly. He slid a single piece of paper across the table to the mediator. "This is a preliminary audit we conducted. It's a list of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, Delaware, and Liechtenstein. Specifically, Vance Holdings International, Seaport Partners LLC, and the Kestrel Fund, all of which were established after the marriage and all of which are funded directly from Vance Real Estate Development, but none of which appear on any of Mr. Vance's financial disclosures." Slade's smile froze. The names were correct. This is nonsense," Slade stammered, recovering. "Those are corporate entities. They have nothing to do with Mr. Vance's personal assets. They are shielded. You know this." This is a fishing expedition." "Is it?" Peterson asked again. He turned a page on his yellow pad. "Then perhaps you can explain why Seaport Partners LLC was used to purchase a $2.3 million condominium at 15 Commonwealth Avenue, a property currently occupied by a Ms. Isabella Rossi, an asset, I might add, purchased with marital funds and therefore subject to division." Andrew's face went from amused to purple. "You son of a— Mr. Vance," the mediator snapped. Slade shot to his feet. "This is an ambush. This is slander. This entire mediation is a bad faith gesture. We are done here." "I have one more question," Peterson said, his voice still calm. "It's about the Vance private server, the one hosted in a data center in Switzerland. We're just curious as to why the company's accounting software runs a shadow ledger every night at 3 a.m. A ledger that seems to siphon a small, consistent percentage of all real estate transactions into the Kestrel Fund. It looks an awful lot like tax evasion. And of course, a concerted effort to defraud Mrs. Vance." The room was deathly quiet. The two junior associates were pale, staring at Slade, whose face was as white as a sheet. He knew about the server, but no one else was supposed to. Andrew stood up, knocking his chair over. He pointed a shaking finger at Peterson. "I don't know who you are, you cheap ambulance-chasing leech," he seethed. "But you just signed your own death warrant. You're a nobody. I will bury you. I will have you disbarred. You and her both will be left with nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing!" He stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the glass in the frame rattled. Slade was left frozen, staring at the old man in the tweed jacket. James Peterson slowly capped his fountain pen. He looked at Slade, and for the first time he smiled. It was a cold, thin, terrible smile. "Mr. Slade," he said politely, "the discovery requests we'll be filing tomorrow will be extensive. I trust you'll be more cooperative this time. Good day." He gathered his single legal pad, helped Elise with her coat, and they walked out, leaving Marcus Slade alone in the sterile, silent room. The smell of Andrew's rage and his own sudden icy fear hanging in the air. The next morning, Marcus Slade's office at Garrity Slade and Cromwell, usually a hub of calm, ruthless efficiency, was in chaos. The promised discovery request had arrived via courier. It was not as Slade had half expected, a kitchen sink request asking for everything. Those were easy to fight. This was a scalpel. It was 800 pages long, and it was a masterpiece of legal devastation. It didn't ask for all financial records. It asked for all transaction logs from inception to present for account number 45, 8B21 at Helvetica First Bank, Zurich, Switzerland, held by the Kestrel Fund. Full server logs and mirror image hard drive data from the VPSVR01 private server hosted by Swiss Data Safe AG. All correspondence, including encrypted messages on the Signal platform between Andrew Vance and Isabella Rossi regarding the transfer of funds for the purchase of 15 Commonwealth Avenue Unit 8B. Deposition schedules for Mr. Vance, Ms. Rossi, and Robert Finchley. Slade's blood ran cold when he saw the last name. Finchley was Andrew's personal CFO, the only other person who knew how the shadow ledger worked. How? Slade whispered to himself, pacing his office. How does he know these names? The Kestrel Fund, the server designation. This isn't a guess. This isn't a leak. This is infiltration. He picked up the phone. Andrew, we have a problem. A significant one. No, don't yell. Just Get to my office, now." While Andrew was racing across town, Slade did what he should have done a week ago. He put his firm's high-priced private investigators on James Peterson. "I want everything." Slade ordered his chief investigator, a former Mossad agent. "I want to know where he buys his coffee, who he talks to, what car he drives, where he went to high school. I want to know his blood type. He's a ghost, I'm telling you. Find him." Andrew burst in his face, mottled with rage. "What is this? What the hell was that yesterday? You were supposed to handle him." "That," Slade said, tossing the 800-page request onto his desk, "is not a geography teacher. That is a problem." "It's a blizzard of paper," Andrew yelled. "It's a bluff. He's trying to scare us." "He's not bluffing, Andrew," Slade roared back, finally losing his composure. "He listed the Swiss bank account number. He listed your private server by its model name. He knows about Finchley. This is not a man who's fishing. This is a man who already has the fish and is now asking for the boat, the lake, and the fishing lodge." Andrew's anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. How is that possible, Elise? She's not smart enough for this. She doesn't even know how to check her own email." "She didn't find him," Slade said, the terrible realization dawning. "He found her. Or someone sent him to her." The phone buzzed. It was the investigator. "Well," Slade snapped, "you're not going to like this, Marcus." The investigator's voice was grim. "I'm sending you a file now. You were right. James Peterson. He's a ghost. But he's a very specific kind of ghost." Slade opened the email. It was a thin file. Peterson's public record was exactly as Slade had first seen small-time lawyer, clean record, nothing. But the investigator had dug deeper using facial recognition on an old photo. James Peterson was an alias, a very, very good one. His real name was James Harrigan. He hadn't been a lawyer for the past 20 years. He'd been a senior forensic accountant and investigator for the U.S. Department of Justice, specializing in dismantling organized crime syndicates. He had retired 5 years ago and vanished. "He's not a lawyer," Slade said, his voice hollow. "Oh, he's a lawyer, all right," the investigator said. "He passed the bar in '79. But that's not what he does. He's an investigator, a bloodhound. But here's the kicker, Marcus. Look at the last page. His known associates." Slade scrolled down. There was only one name linked to a single explosive case from 10 years prior, the takedown of a corrupt hedge fund billionaire. Peterson, then Harrigan, had been the lead investigator and the lead prosecutor who had put the billionaire in prison. "Oh my God," Slade whispered. He sank into his $8,000 office chair. "Who?" Andrew demanded. "Who is it?" Slade looked up, his face ashen. "He's not working alone, Andrew. He's not the lawyer. He's the investigator. He's the man they send in to find the bodies before the war even starts." "Who is the lawyer, Marcus? Who are we up against?" "We're not up against a who," Slade said, reading the name on the file. "We're up against a what. He works for Serafina Hayes." The name just hung in the air. Andrew looked blank. "Who I've never heard of her. Is she good?" Marcus Slade started to laugh. It was a high, thin, terrified sound. "Is she good? Andrew, you idiot. You absolute arrogant idiot. You just stood in a room and mocked a man who works for the Matador. Serafina Hayes isn't good. She's not a lawyer. She's an ending. She doesn't practice law. She is the law. She's the person billionaires call when they want to destroy other billionaires. She's the person the government quietly consults on unwinnable cases. She hasn't lost a case in 22 years. She's not on the news. She's not in the magazines because she's a ghost, just like Peterson. She only takes cases she knows she'll win. And she just signaled through him that she already has. Andrew's legendary confidence, the bedrock of his entire personality, visibly crumbled. So it's higher a door. What do we do? You fight back. You file motions. You bury her. You don't understand, Slade said, standing up and walking to the window. We can't. That 800-page request. It's a courtesy. It's her telling us that she has all of this. The server logs, the Swiss account numbers. She's not requesting them. She's telling us she already has them. Peterson didn't just find this information. He spent the last 6 months, probably a year, digging it all up before Elise even filed. That cheap lawyer. He was her ghost, and we just spat in his face. What? What does she want? Andrew asked, his voice suddenly small. Everything, Slade said, turning from the window. She wants everything. And the worst part, Andrew. She's going to get it. Marcus Slade, for the first time in his career, was on the defensive. He did the only thing he could. He stalled. He filed a motion to quash the discovery requests, calling them a grotesque overreach irrelevant and designed purely to harass. It was a standard aggressive legal tactic, but he knew with a sickening certainty that it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a piece of plywood. The hearing for the motion was set in the Suffolk County Courthouse before Judge Amelia Grant, a no-nonsense jurist who despised theatrical lawyers and valued preparation above all else. Andrew, on Slade's frantic advice, did not attend. "You'll just lose your temper and make it worse," Slade had warned him. Slade and his 2 junior associates arrived 30 minutes early. They were the only ones in the courtroom besides the bailiff. Slade felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she wouldn't show. Maybe she'd send Peterson to argue the motion. He could handle Peterson. He could out-lawyer the old man. At 8:58 a.m. the doors opened. James Peterson walked in wearing the exact same mustard-yellow tweed jacket. He was carrying his battered briefcase. He gave Slade a polite, almost kindly nod and sat down at the opposing table. Slade's shoulders relaxed. He'd been spooked by a name, a reputation. But it was just the geography teacher. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Grant entered, and the proceedings began. "Mr. Slade, the judge said you filed this motion to quash. The burden is on you. Why should I gut Mr. Peterson's entire discovery?" Slade stood. He was back in his element. "Your Honor, this is a simple divorce governed by a prenuptial agreement. Counsel for Mrs. Vance is attempting to turn this into a corporate inquisition. His requests for Swiss server data and offshore corporate ledgers are wildly out of scope. They are irrelevant to the division of marital assets as defined by the pre-NUP. It is a classic baseless fishing expedition." He spoke for 10 minutes, his voice resonating with confidence and legal precedent. He felt good. He was winning. Judge Grant turned to the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Peterson, your response." James Peterson stood up slowly. "Your Honor," he began, his mild voice filling the space. "Mr. Slade is correct. It would be a fishing expedition if we didn't already know exactly what was in the water." "Objection," Slade snapped. "Speculation." "Mr. Peterson," the judge said, "do you have anything more than speculation?" "I do, Your Honor," Peterson said. "But I must apologize to the court. My lead counsel has been delayed. She has the specific evidence you're requesting. She should be here, as if summoned. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a soft whoosh. The sound of stiletto heels on marble was the only sound in the room. It was a sharp, predatory click, click, click that echoed in the silence. Marcus Slade turned. His blood, which had been pumping with the thrill of combat, turned to slush. A woman was walking down the aisle. She was tall, with severe jet-black hair, pulled into a flawless chignon. She wore a bespoke charcoal-grey suit that was understated, yet screamed power. Her face was angular with high cheekbones, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light. She carried a single, slim, black document case. The entire courtroom, from the stenographer to the judge, visibly sat up straighter. She stopped beside Peterson and placed her case on the table. "My apologies for the interruption. Your Honor." Her voice was a low, precise contralto, with a chilling lack of inflection. "Serafina Hayes, lead counsel for the plaintiff, Mrs. Elise Vance. Mr. Peterson, my senior investigative counsel, was just setting the stage." Slade felt the blood drain from his face. It was her. She was real. The matador was in the room. "Hayes," Judge Grant said, her tone respectful. "A pleasure. You are not often into this particular courtroom." "I go where my clients need me." "Your Honor," Serafina said, "and my client needs this motion denied. Mr. Slade argues relevance." "Very well." She opened her case. "Mr. Slade claims the Kestrel Fund is irrelevant. I submit to the court Exhibit A." She nodded to Peterson, who handed a file to the judge. "This is a wire transfer confirmation, dated 3 weeks after Mrs. Vance filed for divorce, showing a transfer of $15 million from Mr. Vance's personal brokerage account into the Kestrel Fund. A clear, deliberate, and illegal attempt to hide a marital asset." Slade's mouth went dry. He hadn't known about that. Andrew had lied to him. "He argues the private server is out of scope," Serafina continued, her voice cutting through the silence. "I submit Exhibit B." Peterson handed up a second file. "This is a sworn affidavit from a former employee of Vance Real Estate Development, Mr. Robert Finchley." Slade actually staggered. Finchley. They had gotten to Finchley. "Mr. Finchley attests," Serafina said, "that he was personally instructed by Mr. Vance to create and maintain a shadow ledger on that exact server for the express purpose of skimming profits to defraud not only his business partners, but the IRS and, by extension, his wife. The affidavit includes detailed examples." She turned for the first time and looked directly at Marcus Slade. Her eyes were not angry. They were not triumphant. They were impossibly bored. It was the look of a biologist studying a microbe. "The prenuptial agreement," she said, "is a contract, and all contracts are rendered null and void by one simple thing: criminal fraud. Mr. Slade's client didn't just hide assets. He committed multiple felonies. My discovery requests are not a fishing expedition, Your Honor. They are a confirmation." She turned back to the judge. "We are no longer discussing a prenup. We are discussing a criminal enterprise, and Mrs. Vance is entitled to her share of all of it. Deny this motion, Your Honor, or my next stop is the U.S. Attorney's office. The choice really is Mr. Slade's." There was a full minute of suffocating silence. Judge Grant looked at the files. She looked at the ashen, speechless Marcus Slade. She looked at Serafina Hayes. "Mr. Slade," the judge asked, "anything to add?" Slade opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it. He shook his head. Motion to quash is denied. Judge Grant said, her gavel striking the wood with the finality of a death knell. Mr. Slade, you will produce all requested materials to Ms. Hayes's office within 48 hours. And, sir, I suggest you advise your client on the severe penalties for perjury and obstruction of justice. We are adjourned. Serafina Hayes snapped her document case shut. Mr. Peterson, thank you for fetching my coffee, she said, loud enough for Slade to hear. Peterson smiled his thin smile. Of course, Ms. Hayes. They turned and walked out. Click, 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 leaving Marcus Slade alone, shaking at the defendant's table. The war was over. The annihilation was about to begin. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. When Marcus Slade returned to his office, he found Andrew Vance already there, pacing the floor like a skinned bear. Well, Andrew demanded, did you crush him? Did you get the motion? Slade walked past him, went straight to the bar cart in his office, and poured a heavy measure of whiskey. He drank it in one swallow. She was there, Andrew, he said, his voice flat. She who's she? Serafina Hayes. She was in the courtroom. So you're Marcus Slade. You're supposed to be the best. The best. Slade rounded on him, his professional mask gone replaced by pure, undiluted panic. You lied to me, Andrew. You lied to your own counsel, the Kestrel Fund. You moved $15 million after she filed. Are you insane? It's my money, Andrew roared. It's a felony, Slade screamed back. And she knew. She had the wire transfer. And Finchley. She has a sworn affidavit from Robert Finchley about the shadow ledger. She has everything. She wasn't asking for discovery, Andrew. She was showing us her evidence. Andrew Vance, for the first time in his adult life, looked truly, deeply terrified. Finchley, that's not possible. This is what she does, Slade raved, pouring another drink. This is the Matador's signature move. The case is over before it ever begins. Peterson, that cheap lawyer. He wasn't a lawyer. He was her private intelligence. He's been on you for months. While you were at Garlus laughing about your stupid wife, this man was, God knows, he was probably posing as a janitor, a technician, a banker. The story of how Elise had found her was like Serafina herself, simple and secret. 3 years ago, at an art benefit, Elise had confided in an older, wiser mentor, a woman who had famously been divorced from a New York hedge fund magnate and inexplicably had ended up with everything. My dear, the woman had told her, lawyers are for the press. When you actually want to win, you call a ghost. She had given Elise the business card for J. Peterson Escrew, with a simple instruction: call him when you can no longer bear to live the life you have. Not a moment sooner. When Elise made that call, Peterson met her not in an office, but on a bench in the Boston Public Garden. She told him her story. He listened silent for an hour. When she was done, he'd said only, "She will take the case, but you must do exactly as I say. Do not change a single thing about your life. Do not confront him. Do not show your hand. You must continue to be the ghost in his house. Go home. Be the perfect silent wife. We will handle the rest." For the next 6 months, James Peterson had been a phantom. He posed as a high net worth investor from Germany, meeting with Robert Finchley to discuss off-market opportunities and appealing to the man's own greed. He'd gotten Finchley to boast about the brilliant server system his boss used. He had flown to the Caymans and, using his old DOJ credentials quietly reactivated by friends in high places, had managed to pierce the corporate veil of Vance Holdings. He had quite simply dismantled Andrew's entire empire brick by fraudulent brick, all while Andrew was busy mocking his wife's dress. Now, with the discovery motion granted, Serafina's team didn't just act, they invaded. Within 48 hours, they had a court-appointed forensic team making a mirror image of the Swiss server. They subpoenaed Isabella Rossi. Her deposition was a masterpiece of humiliation. Under Serafina's cold, precise questioning, the young woman dissolved into tears, admitting not only to the affair, but to the $2.3 million condo, a $150,000 black Amex, paid by a Kestrel fund account, and a garage full of cars. It was a clear, massive, and fraudulent dissipation of marital assets. Then they deposed Andrew. It was not a deposition. It was a vivisection. It was held in Serafina's conference room, a minimalist space of white marble and glass. For 12 hours, Serafina and Peterson, sitting side by side, walked Andrew through every single illegal transaction, every email, every text message. They presented him with the server logs. They showed him the wire transfers. They played a recording obtained legally by Finchley of Andrew, instructing him to bury the European profits in the Kestrel Fund. Andrew's bluster dissolved into monosyllabic, mumbled answers. I don't recall. That could mean anything. I'd have to check my records. Marcus Slade sat beside him, chain-drinking coffee, objecting on grounds of relevance and harassment, his voice getting weaker with every hour. Serafina merely noted his objections for the record and continued her relentless, quiet assault. By the end of the day, Andrew Vance was not just a defendant. He was a broken man. But Serafina wasn't finished. As they were packing up, she said, "Oh, one more thing, Mr. Slade." She nodded to Peterson, who placed a small final file on the table. While Mr. Peterson was reviewing the server logs, he found something curious, Serafina said. It seems Mr. Vance's development company has a habit of using substandard, non-code compliant steel in his high-rise buildings and filing falsified inspection reports with the city of Boston, a city, I might add, that is currently reviewing his bid for the new waterfront project. Slade looked at the file. It was an engineer's report, cross-referenced with invoices for cheap foreign steel. It was undeniable proof of corners cut, of public endangerment. This, Serafina said, goes beyond marital fraud. This is a public matter. Wire fraud, tax evasion. And now this. Mr. Vance hasn't just built a house of cards. He's built a literal one. She looked at Andrew, her dark eyes devoid of all emotion. Mr. Slade will receive our final settlement offer in the morning. I strongly suggest you accept it, without negotiation. The offer arrived at 8:00 a.m. the next morning. It was not a negotiation. It was a surrender document. Marcus Slade read it, his hands shaking, and called Andrew. You need to come here. You need to sign this. Today. I'm not signing anything. Andrew's voice was thin, reedy, all the baritone bluster gone. We fight. We take this to trial. There is no trial, Andrew. Slade finally snapped, all pretense of loyalty gone. Do you understand me? She has you. She has you on wire fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. That's RICO, you idiot! We are not in a divorce proceeding. We are in a hostage negotiation. The settlement is her letting you stay out of federal prison. The final meeting was set for noon, not in a neutral space. In Serafina Hayes's office, Andrew Vance entered for the first time, not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant. He was pale, he hadn't shaved, and his expensive suit looked too large for him as if he'd shrunk. Elise was already there, seated at the long white table, flanked by Peterson and Serafina. She looked serene, wearing a simple blue dress. She looked at Andrew as he entered, and he saw for the first time not the meek wife, but the woman who had sanctioned his destruction. There was no pity in her eyes, just finality. "Thank you for coming," Serafina said, as if they were there to discuss the weather. "The terms are, I believe, clear." She laid out the document. 1. Elise Vance would receive 60% of all marital assets. Not the declared assets, but the true assets, including the offshore accounts, the Kestrel Fund, and the Cayman holdings. The total value was estimated at just over $900 million. 2. The Boston penthouse and all art and furnishings contained within would be signed over to Elise free and clear. 3. The 15 Commonwealth Avenue condo currently occupied by Isabella Rossi would be signed over to Elise to be liquidated at her discretion. 4. Andrew Vance would pay a one-time alimony sum of $50 million to compensate for the deliberate and fraudulent attempts to conceal assets. 5. Andrew Vance would pay all of Elise's legal fees, including the multi-million-dollar retainer for Ms. Hayes and Mr. Peterson. 6. The NDA was voided. Elise would be free to speak. Andrew, however, would be subject to a new permanent NDA, forbidding him from ever speaking about Elise Serafina Hayes or the details of the case under penalty of a $100 million fine. Andrew was breathing hard. This is theft." "No," Serafina said, not looking up from her papers. "This is a discount, because there is a seventh term." She slid a second, much smaller document across the table. "This is a confession," she said. "It's a full detailed admission of the shadow ledger, the tax evasion, and the wire fraud. It has been prepared for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Next to it is our settlement agreement." She finally looked at him. "You will sign one. If you sign the settlement, this confession is shredded. The evidence of your corporate fraud, the bad steel, the fake inspections is sealed. It will never see the light of day. If you hesitate, if you argue, if you try to negotiate $1, Mr. Peterson will walk this confession and all its supporting evidence across the street to the federal courthouse. You will be in a holding cell by 5 p.m. Your company will be destroyed, your partners will sue you, and you will spend the next 20 to 30 years in prison." She pushed a gold pen across the table. "You have 60 seconds to decide which document you'd like to sign, Mr. Vance." Andrew stared at the pen. He looked at Slade, who just stared at the table. He looked at Elise, who watched him, her expression unreadable. He saw his entire life, the galas, the cars, the power evaporating. His hand, shaking violently, reached out. He grabbed the pen. He pulled the 40-page settlement agreement toward him, and with a choked sob, he signed the last page. Serafina Hayes took the document, reviewed the signature, and nodded. She then picked up the confession, walked to a shredder by her desk, and fed it in. The sound of grinding teeth filled the room. "Our business is concluded, Mr. Vance," she said. "You may leave. Mr. Slade, please wait to discuss the transfer logistics." Andrew stood a hollowed-out shell of the man who had entered. He tried to look at Elise to say something, an apology, a curse, but she had already turned away. She was looking out the window at the Boston skyline. Her skyline. Andrew Vance walked out of the office, a free man, and a ruined one. The final scene took place 2 weeks later. Elise was not in a high-rise penthouse, but in a small, bright cafe in the South End. The morning sun streamed in. She was sipping a coffee, sketching in a notebook. The bell on the door jingled, and James Peterson sat down opposite her, a small smile on his face. He was, she noted, still wearing the tweed jacket. "Elise," he said warmly. "James," she smiled. "Thank you for meeting me. I never really got to thank you. For everything. You saved my life." Peterson waved it off. "We just balanced the books. Serafina hates bullies, and frankly so do I. He never did get me that coffee, did he?" Elise laughed, a real, genuine laugh. It was a sound she hadn't made in a decade. "I'll buy you all the coffee you want, James. What's next for you?" "Oh, I hear there's a tech billionaire in Seattle who needs a geography lesson," he said with a wink. He stood up, placing a small wrapped box on the table. "A parting gift," he said, "from Serafina." Elise opened it. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was the Patek Philippe watch Andrew had been wearing at the mediation, the one he'd boasted about. It had been technically a marital asset. Elise looked at the watch, a symbol of all that arrogance and cruelty. Then she looked at Peterson. "What will you do now, Elise?" he asked. She looked out the window at the people walking by, at the life she was about to start. Her sister was flying in tomorrow to stay with her in the penthouse to start her new, fully funded treatment. Her gallery was set to open in the spring. "I think," she said, slipping the watch into her pocket, "to sell for charity. I'm going to finish my sketch." She was, for the first time in a very long time, free. In the end, it wasn't about the money. It was about the silence. Andrew Vance made his fortune building towering, empty monuments to himself, but he was destroyed by the two people he never bothered to see: a quiet wife he thought was weak, and an old man he thought was cheap. He never realized that true power doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need a $5,000 suit or a flashy watch. True power is patient, it's intelligent, it waits, it watches, and it keeps its receipts. Elise didn't just win a settlement, she won her life back. She proved that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one everyone underestimates. What did you think of Serafina's strategy? Was Andrew's takedown as satisfying for you as it was for me? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder to never ever judge a book by its cover. If you love stories of justice, karma, and epic revenge, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. We have so many more stories to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for listening.
Pregnant wife struggles after billionaire cancels her credit cards at mistress's request. Thunder growled in the distance as Celia Devon stood at the entrance to the Cromwell Foundation Gala, her hand protectively cradling the gentle swell of her belly. She sensed the tension rippling beneath the glittering social scene, a current as electric as the storm-laden sky overhead. The gathering was meant to celebrate tycoon Alistair Cromwell's triumph in securing a new round of lucrative investments. But to Celia, it felt more like the overture to a tragedy she couldn't yet name. She had no idea that this night, brimming with champagne, ball gowns, and whispered gossip, would mark the last point of normalcy in her life. Inside, Alistair was already mingling with politicians, celebrities, and industry magnates who clinked glasses under chandeliers that glowed like captive suns. Celia, a warm-hearted philanthropist known for her soft smile and quiet resilience, wore a timeless emerald gown that complemented her olive skin and brunette curls. She had always served as the gracious counterpart to Alistair's commanding presence. Where he was brash, she was empathetic. Where he saw the world through the lens of power, she saw the beating hearts behind the numbers. Yet as she entered the grand hall, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. By the time Celia located Alistair near a gilded marble staircase, she sensed another force in the room, a presence that sent subtle ripples through the crowd. Looking across a sea of meticulously dressed patrons, her eyes landed on Bianca Harwick for the first time. Draped in a crimson sheath that shimmered with each step, Bianca carried herself with the cool poise of a practiced social climber. She locked eyes with Celia for a split second before turning away with a knowing half-smile. Alistair, so often a pillar of confidence, barely seemed to notice his wife's arrival, captured instead by a hushed conversation with Bianca. Celia's pregnant heart pounded with a quiet warning she couldn't quite articulate. In that simple, subtle encounter, Celia felt her reality begin to split. I can't help but think it's often the faintest warnings that portend the greatest storms. If you were in Celia's place, would you trust your instincts at such a fleeting sign? Or would you dismiss it as just another worry? Share your thoughts. How would you react? Celia shook off her apprehension that night, telling herself that she was simply on edge due to the pregnancy. Instead of dwelling on Alistair's proximity to Bianca, she focused on greeting donors and longtime supporters of their philanthropic ventures. As she moved through clusters of tuxedos and sequin gowns, the mild ache in her feet was overshadowed by the warmth of congratulatory remarks. A few people teased her about the joys of impending motherhood, and each congratulation kindled a spark of excitement in her. She hoped Alistair would join her soon, reminding herself that no matter what, they shared a bond that had carried them through many challenges. What Celia did not know was that Bianca Harwick had orchestrated her presence at the gala with surgical precision. Though new to Alistair's circle, she was far from inexperienced in the art of manipulation. Bianca had spent weeks gathering intelligence, which committees Alistair chaired, which business ventures he was keen to pursue, and most importantly, which vulnerabilities he harbored beneath his polished exterior. By the time the gala invitations went out, she had already arranged an entire campaign of coincidental encounters, ensuring Alistair would find her alluring, ambitious, and indispensable. Outside the glare of paparazzi flashes and the hum of polite conversation, Celia was already fighting her own battle. Her pregnancy had been dotted with complications. Regular checkups indicated she needed to reduce stress and maintain a healthy diet, but the worry lines on her brow hinted that this was easier said than done. Alistair's growing distance in recent weeks, combined with the demands of his new venture, wore on her. He came home late, left early, and seemed perpetually distracted. Every time she tried to address it, he insisted it was only business. Hadn't she wanted him to expand, to broaden the empire so they could do even more good in the world? Celia didn't argue, but the sense of unease from earlier refused to dissipate. To me, it feels that uneasy silence can be more damaging than a heated argument. Would you confront a distant partner, or would you let it slide to keep the peace, especially if there's a child on the way? I'd love to know. Do you think open conflict is better than silent doubt? Weeks passed, and Celia's concerns ballooned. Alistair was away on business more often than ever, usually accompanied by Bianca, who was billed as his marketing strategist. Sometimes he would half-heartedly invite Celia along, but only for perfunctory dinners or events where she felt like an accessory rather than a partner. The real conversations, the crucial negotiations, the overseas flights, the closed-door meetings, those all featured Bianca in a starring role. Celia made a note to check the household's finances, suspecting something amiss when her usual grocery trip became a dance of budget constraints. She was never reckless with spending, but she had begun noticing that certain accounts seemed to have unusual holds or lesser balances than she remembered. When she hesitantly approached Alistair about it, he waved off her questions. "Don't fret over the numbers," he murmured, pressing a dismissive kiss to her forehead. "I'm making big moves. Everything will settle once the expansions pay off. Trust me." For a moment, Celia wanted to believe him, as she always had. He was her husband, the father of the tiny heartbeat fluttering in her womb, and she desperately wished her looming suspicions were baseless. It was Harriet Clark, Celia's longtime friend from university, who became the first to voice what Celia still hesitated to say. Over herbal tea in Harriet's snug living room, Celia confessed her anxieties. Alistair's absences, Bianca's omnipresence, the hush that fell whenever Celia entered the room. Harriet's dark eyes burned with protective indignation. "You have to confront him, Celia," she said bluntly. "Unless you can live with this knot in your stomach forever, Harriet's directness always bordered on fierce loyalty. She had once marched across campus to give a professor an earful for overlooking Celia's contribution in a group project. Celia swallowed back tears, clinging to Harriet's hand. I just don't want to believe he'd hurt me like that, especially now. Harriet's expression softened. I get it, but you have to be ready. If your instincts are right, you'll need all your strength. Harriet's advice hits hard. Sometimes we need a friend's courage when we can't find our own. Have you ever had a friend who pushed you to confront a painful truth? Did it help or strain your relationship? Please share your experiences. Celia promised Harriet she'd keep her eyes open. Indeed, she began noticing details she had once overlooked. She spotted text messages on Alistair's phone, left carelessly in their living room, a few from Bianca that read oddly like private jokes. Then one evening, Celia found an airline receipt for 2 first-class seats to Dubai, even though Alistair had claimed he was traveling alone to secure a Middle Eastern investment. The shock simmered into a dull ache. She considered confronting Alistair immediately, but worried it would escalate into a blowout that might jeopardize her already delicate pregnancy. Bianca, meanwhile, was settling into Alistair's life with an unapologetic flourish. She was cunning enough to realize that as long as Celia was around, Alistair might keep one foot in his old life. Bianca's ambition dictated that Celia had to be completely sidelined, stripped of resources, status, and any emotional leverage. A late dinner in Alistair's private suite became the perfect stage for Bianca's next move. She coaxed him into unveiling more and more about his financial dealings, sharing selective tips on which accounts to consolidate and which legal loopholes could keep a spouse from meddling with business growth. Flattered by Bianca's calculated praise, "You're a visionary, Alistair. Why let anyone hold you back?" Alistair allowed himself to be swept deeper into her thrall. Soon, under Bianca's guidance, he made intangible shifts in his bank accounts, siphoning money into expansions that may or may not be legitimate. In her persuasive tone, Bianca constantly hinted that Celia's spending was unnecessary or misguided, subtly eroding Alistair's confidence in his wife. Still, the moment that sealed Celia's fate arrived abruptly. At a luxurious brunch in a downtown penthouse, a minor disagreement flared between Alistair and Celia over next year's philanthropic budget. Celia wanted more funds to go to a children's hospital, while Alistair believed they should pivot to high-profile, prestige charities for a better public image. Bianca seized the opportunity, leaning into Alistair's ear to apologize for eavesdropping, but also to mention how a certain consultant recommended drastically cutting personal expenses to funnel more cash into his business endeavors. By dessert, Alistair was convinced that Celia's philanthropic approach was not only naive, but actively detrimental to his big plans. When someone sows doubts in your closest relationships, it can feel like your world is shifting beneath you. Have you witnessed a loved one change dramatically due to an outsider's influence? What advice would you give to someone trapped in that situation? The stroke of the pen came a week later, but for Celia, the blow felt like a punch to the gut. She was at a local market, loading her cart with essentials, fresh produce, prenatal vitamins, gentle detergents safe for newborn skin, when her credit card declined. A line formed behind her, impatient customers huffing and rolling their eyes. Confused, she tried another card. Again, declined. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She fumbled to gather whatever cash she had on hand, finally managing to pay for only half her groceries. Driving straight to her bank, she pleaded for an explanation, certain it must be a clerical error. The bank manager spoke softly but with finality. Her husband, Alistair Cromwell, had revoked her access, citing business restructuring. Nothing could be done unless Alistair reversed the directive. Heart pounding, Celia left, mind reeling with possible reasons. Had they fallen into secret financial ruin? Was the big expansion failing? Or was this exactly what Harriet had warned her about, Bianca's sabotage in action? That evening, Celia confronted Alistair the moment he walked in, standing rigidly by the living room fireplace. He seemed exasperated by her questions. "I told you, I need the liquidity," he said without shame. "I have to ensure funds go where they'll grow. We can't be frivolous right now." Celia's voice trembled as she pointed out that essential items for their baby were hardly frivolous. Instead of a reasonable explanation, she was met with a chilling lack of emotion. "I'll take care of the baby," Alistair said in a tone more fitting for a business pitch than a father. "But I can't have you draining resources. I'm sorry if it's hard to understand, but this is the future of my empire." My heart aches whenever I imagine Celia's humiliation at the store. Cutting off someone financially is a form of control that can be devastating. Do you think you'd be able to keep calm and fight back legally? Or would the emotional impact undermine your resolve? Feel free to discuss. In a flash, Celia realized that her world was not only fracturing, but also collapsing under the weight of deliberate cruelty. When Alistair made it clear he wanted her out of the mansion, out of sight, out of mind, her worst fears became reality. The father of her unborn child, once a charismatic dreamer who'd spun tales of building schools and hospitals, had devolved into an unrecognizable figure chasing only personal gain. On the night he told her to find somewhere else to stay, Celia packed a small suitcase with trembling hands. She left behind the towering staircases, the gleaming marble floors, and the memory of the life she once cherished. Harriet provided immediate refuge, ushering Celia into her modest townhouse. They made up the sofa with spare blankets, and Celia tried to steady her breathing as she sank onto the cushions. She was homeless, disconnected from any financial safety net, and heavily pregnant. Could it get worse? Harriet gently reminded her that if she needed legal recourse, she'd find it. That flicker of hope pushed Celia to contact Philippa Rawlings, a well-respected family lawyer known for her fearlessness in court. Meanwhile, Bianca reveled in her triumph. Alistair was fully in her pocket now, malleable to her ambitions. She began pitching daring business expansions faster than Alistair could keep up, funneling money into questionable marketing campaigns and funneling her own name into bigger circles. Yet her victory was not as stable as it seemed. The more Alistair leaned on her, the more he scrutinized her. He rarely let her out of his sight, and his controlling streak began to rear its head. Checking her phone, questioning her meetings, pestering about trivial details. It was a far cry from the glamorous liaison Bianca had envisioned. Celia, on the other hand, was mustering every ounce of courage she had left. She met with Philippa Rawlings, laying out bank statements and recounting how she had been cut off. Philippa's eyes flared with indignation as she promised Celia that no judge would ignore a pregnant wife's legal entitlements. "He doesn't get to cast you aside like a used toy," Philippa said firmly, taking a stack of paperwork. "Let's get you what you deserve." Isn't it remarkable how adversity can spark new strength we never knew we possessed? Have you ever faced a situation where you found yourself far braver than you'd imagined? Let's discuss how hardship can reveal hidden resilience. The legal battle began with a small but meaningful victory. Philippa filed a motion for temporary support. Given Celia's pregnancy and the abrupt shutdown of her finances, the court found Alistair's actions extraordinarily callous. Though he had teams of lawyers to defend him, public sentiment turned against him once rumors spread that he had cast out his pregnant wife. The judge at the preliminary hearing wasted no time ordering Alistair to cover prenatal care, living expenses, and related costs until a final settlement could be reached. Bianca seethed in the gallery as Celia's lawyer secured this early win, while Alistair stared at the table, refusing to meet Celia's gaze. High on that partial triumph, Celia committed herself to forging a new path. An old contact at a local nonprofit offered her a small position managing fundraising strategies. The salary was modest, but it came with the promise of flexible hours and a genuinely supportive environment. Harriet helped her pick out a decent interview outfit, and Celia, nervous about her pregnant belly, was relieved to find the nonprofit staff welcoming, even admiring her perseverance. Over days that turned to weeks, Celia channeled the heartbreak she once felt into a quiet, determined energy. Surprisingly, success in her new role came swiftly. Celia's sincerity and experience in philanthropic work shone through. Donors responded to her authenticity rather than the glitter of Alistair's grand empire. She spearheaded a campaign for an underfunded youth shelter, bringing in double the expected donations. For the first time in months, Celia felt as though she was not only surviving, but thriving. The baby's routine kicks each morning felt like a reassuring cadence, like Rose, Lily, or some name still unknown, was encouraging her from the inside, cheering on her mother's remarkable transformation. Life is ironic sometimes. The very man who starved Celia of resources inadvertently unlocked a new chapter in her career. Do you believe that sometimes doors close specifically so we can find a better one? How have you handled unexpected opportunities that arose from adversity? As Celia stabilized her life, Alistair's once soaring business empire began to rattle. Deals that Bianca had orchestrated began unraveling under scrutiny. Investors complained of broken promises, while smaller partners grumbled that they never received agreed-upon returns. No single venture alone spelled catastrophe, but collectively, they formed a grim mosaic of half-fulfilled contracts and oversold dreams. Anger trickled upward through the ranks, and soon key investors threatened to withdraw. Bianca, feeling cornered, tried to schedule a grand investor confidence gala at Alistair's mansion to mask the growing crisis. She reasoned that if they dazzled the right people with an opulent display, they could hush the naysayers and hold on to the last shreds of goodwill. Alistair, exhausted, desperate, and harboring private regrets, agreed, though he wore the hollow face of a man flailing in quicksand. Word of this gala reached Harriet through a mutual acquaintance, and she wasted no time telling Celia. At first, Celia only shrugged. She had no desire to walk back into that mansion, rife with memories of a love that once seemed destined to last forever. But Philippa and Harriet both insisted that Celia's appearance could reinforce her position in the ongoing legal negotiations. "Show you're not cowering," they said. "Show you have every right to stand in those gilded halls, even if you're no longer Mrs. Cromwell in spirit." On the evening of the gala, Celia donned an understated but elegant maternity dress, calming her nerves with deep breaths in Harriet's car. Reporters outside the mansion snapped photos of her with wide-eyed curiosity. No one had expected Alistair's pregnant wife to appear in the midst of rumors about a mistress. The corridor leading to the grand ballroom shimmered with gold fixtures and fresh bouquets, the entire space a stage for Alistair in Bianca's spectacle of grandeur. Yet tension clung to every surface, as if the house itself remembered what had been lost. Glamorous events can hide the ugliest truths, can't they? Have you ever witnessed or attended a public event where underneath the smiles, chaos brewed? If so, how did it make you feel, observing such a fractured reality? Once inside, Celia felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Sorrow for the memories she had cherished in these halls, apprehension about confronting her husband and Bianca, and a strange new confidence she'd never possessed before. She had battled humiliation, legal intimidation, and heartbreak, but here she was. Harriet remained by her side, scanning the crowd until she spotted Bianca, who was regaling a group of high-profile investors near the piano. Alistair stood close, looking dazed yet trying to appear confident. Then an uproar erupted from a circle of shareholders. Lawrence Caldwell, a major investor rumored to be on the brink of pulling out, stepped forward, brandishing a series of documents like a weapon. "I gave you millions," he snapped at Alistair, "and you promised me triple returns after your expansions took off. Now I hear half the expansions don't even exist." A hush fell as the crowd pressed in. Desperate, Bianca plastered on a sycophantic smile, trying to intervene. "There's been a small delay. Please, let's discuss this privately." Caldwell sneered. "So you can spin more fairy tales? I don't think so." Cameras and murmurs rippled through the room, capturing the meltdown. Alistair's carefully curated empire was unraveling publicly, each strand of his reputation snapping in front of the very people he'd once sought to impress. Celia watched, a tangle of pity and vindication. She never wanted Alistair to fail. She had believed in his visions. The heartbreak in her chest echoed the memory of the day he rescinded her credit cards. Now he stood humiliated, overshadowed by the unstoppable avalanche of his own poor decisions. Trying to salvage the moment, Bianca clung to Alistair's arm. He shook her off in an uncharacteristic show of anger, hissing, "I trusted you to handle this. You said we'd be untouchable." The watchers parted in an uneasy hush, giving Celia a clear line of sight to her estranged husband. He locked eyes with her for an instant. She recognized regret, humiliation, and maybe a flicker of shame, before he turned to Caldwell and began a flustered attempt at damage control. It's a strange thing when someone you once loved stands before you as both a cautionary tale and a sorrowful figure. Could you summon empathy for someone who betrayed you, or would you relish their downfall? I'm curious how others balance compassion with lingering hurt. As the gala disintegrated into chaotic accusations and walkouts, Celia slipped away to a quieter corner, trying to process her own maelstrom of emotions. She heard Harriet's voice behind her, whispering, "You okay?" Celia managed a faint nod, her hand drifting to her abdomen, where the baby's soft flutters seemed to echo her anxious heartbeat. After the meltdown, Alistair vanished. Days later, he contacted Celia through his lawyers to schedule a final discussion regarding their future and the baby's welfare. Despite her trepidation, Celia consented, meeting him in a neutral conference room at Philippa Rawlings' law office. Face to face, Alistair looked thinner, with dark circles etched under his eyes. The scorching glare of scandal, combined with Bianca's mismanagement, had ravaged his once mighty empire. He mumbled his regrets, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of desperation. With uncharacteristic hesitance, he promised to honor child support and spousal provisions as required by law. Celia let her lawyer handle the formalities, focusing instead on the thought of her unborn child. She needed to know if Alistair would at least attempt to be a father. He offered a shaky affirmation. The sincerity in his voice was questionable, but Celia accepted it for Rose's, or Lily's, sake. She hadn't settled on a name yet, but she'd soon know. Bianca, for her part, vanished from Alistair's day-to-day affairs. Rumors circulated that she had moved to another city, possibly in pursuit of a fresh victim to charm. The flamboyant extravagance she had flaunted only a short time earlier was reduced to a whisper in the circles that had once welcomed her. Alistair discovered questionable transactions linking Bianca to shadow companies, but by then, she was gone. Soon after the legal details were hammered out, Celia went into labor. The birth was difficult but successful. Through it all, Harriet remained steadfast, offering words of encouragement and unconditional support. Finally, Celia held a baby girl in her arms, a radiant little life who gazed up with bright, curious eyes. In that tender moment, the mansion, the credit cards, and the betrayal all seemed far away. The child she named Rose embodied the promise of a new beginning. Cradling a newborn can make everything else seem inconsequential, don't you think? If you've had children, how did that moment change your perspective on what truly matters? Celia's new life began in a modest but cozy apartment not far from the nonprofit office. She furnished it with simplicity and warmth, second-hand furniture carefully chosen for comfort, fresh flowers on the windowsill, and a small crib beside her bed where Rose gurgled contentedly. Her daily routine involved feeding Rose at dawn, making coffee, and managing her nonprofit duties from home when possible. On some weekends, Harriet whisked her and the baby off for short outings to the park. A world of strollers, gentle breezes, and squealing toddlers that felt refreshingly normal. Legally, Celia's divorce settlement concluded with enough support to ensure Rose's well-being. Alistair visited sporadically, bearing gifts that felt more like tokens of guilt than genuine paternal affection. Still, Celia allowed him to see Rose, holding on to a flicker of hope that one day he might show genuine responsibility as a father. If that never happened, she was prepared to raise her daughter alone, fortified by the sense of independence and self-worth she had found. In the aftermath, Alistair's empire survived, though diminished. He downsized staff and sold off large portions of his holdings. His name no longer inspired as much awe. People whispered about his dramatic downfall and the cunning mistress who had orchestrated it. If he managed to salvage a fraction of his fortune, it came at the cost of losing the one woman who had loved him sincerely. Bianca, rumored to be seeking new conquests in different circles, remained a ghostly cautionary tale, proof that ambition untethered from conscience can lead to ruin for everyone involved. In the glow of a pink sunrise one morning, Celia rocked baby Rose in her arms, gazing out the window at a city that had once dazzled her, but now no longer overshadowed her. She had faced betrayal at her most vulnerable moment and emerged with her spirit intact. "We made it," she whispered to Rose, pressing a kiss to the baby's soft forehead. And for the first time in a long while, Celia truly believed those words. She was no longer defined by what she lost. She was defined by the strength she gained in the process. The notion of walking out with nothing often underestimates how the intangible gifts, courage, self-discovery, inner peace, can surpass material losses. Would you say Celia ultimately gained more than she lost? Or do you believe certain damages can never be fully repaired? I'd love to hear your reflections and personal stories in the comments.